A single fire erased centuries of human knowledge. The great library of Alexandria was more than a building. It was the ancient world's collective brain, and its destruction is one of history's most devastating intellectual tragedies. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly how much was lost and why it still matters to us today. We will uncover the truth behind its hidden archives and the specific, priceless texts that vanished forever. What if the library's secrets included discoveries that could have changed our world? How does the ghost of this ancient loss still haunt our modern age? What do you believe is the cost of forgetting? The ambition to build such a place was born from a singular, almost unimaginable goal. Ptolemy I, a successor to Alexander the Great, did not want a simple library. He envisioned the Museum, a temple dedicated to the Muses, and within it, an institution unlike anything the world had seen. This was not merely a quiet hall for scrolls. It was a living, breathing university, a research center, and a sanctuary for genius. The brightest thinkers were offered salaries, meals, and a life dedicated entirely to thought, free from worldly concerns. Here, the mathematician Euclid organized the principles of geometry. The engineer Archimedes reportedly conceived his incredible war machines. It was a think tank for the ancient world, a hive of intellectual activity funded directly by the royal treasury. The core mission was breathtakingly simple, yet impossibly vast. Agents were dispatched across the known world with a royal mandate and a blank check. Their orders were to acquire every book in existence, every Greek play, every epic poem, every Persian astronomical chart, every Egyptian medical papyrus. If a text existed, a copy was to be found and brought to Alexandria. Every ship that docked in the city's great harbor was searched. Any scrolls found were confiscated, with the owners given copies while the originals were added to the library's permanent collection. This was a systematic, state-sponsored project to create a complete backup of human consciousness, a single archive containing the sum of all knowledge. In doing so, Alexandria did not just store ideas, it became the brain of the ancient world, a central processor where information was gathered, debated, refined, and then sent back out into the world. We are only now, in our own digital age, beginning to grasp the sheer audacity of that vision, a vision that would place one city at the very center of everything humanity knew. The sheer scale of this collection is almost impossible to grasp. Picture a library that may have held 400,000 individual scrolls. Each one was a hand-copied, irreplaceable vessel of thought, a physical piece of human understanding. To manage this flood of information, the library's methods were as ambitious as its goal. Royal agents met every trading vessel that entered the great harbor. They did not ask permission. They confiscated every scroll, every book, every map and ledger found on board. These texts were rushed to a team of scribes who worked in a frantic, continuous relay of copying. The original text stayed in the library's permanent collection. Only the freshly made copies were handed back to the confused and often angry ship captains. This was not a polite request for cultural exchange. It was a state-mandated seizure of the world's knowledge, a systematic harvesting of every idea that sailed into the city. Through this relentless process, the library's shelves swelled with works from every corner of the ancient world. It contained the complex astronomical charts of Babylonian priests who mapped the stars. It held the profound spiritual philosophies from the thinkers of India. There were plays by Sophocles and Aeschylus that we will never read, and medical texts from Egypt detailing surgeries and remedies now lost to time. This was not a specialized collection. It was an all-encompassing archive of human achievement, a universal database built of papyrus and ink. In many ways, it was the ancient equivalent of the entire internet, stored in a single, fragile building. We can only guess at the true breadth of what was inside, a treasure trove whose full catalogue vanished forever. But the iconic library was only the heart of a much larger system. Tucked away in the city's sprawling Serapeum temple complex was a second, public collection known as the Daughter Library. This was the accessible branch, where scholars and perhaps even curious citizens could engage with copies of the great works. Yet the most compelling secrets are said to lie far deeper, in legends of hidden vaults carved beneath the city's foundations. Whispers from antiquity speak of subterranean archives, secret chambers designed to protect the library's most sensitive and sacred treasures. These were not copies for general study. They were the originals, the irreplaceable manuscripts deemed too volatile or too profound for public consumption. Imagine the texts that might have been locked away there, the original, unedited works of the pre-Socratic philosophers, thinkers who challenged the very nature of reality before Socrates. Their complete writings are almost entirely lost to us, surviving only in fragments quoted by later authors. What revolutionary ideas were contained in those full scrolls? The archives were also rumored to hold navigational logs and maps from ancient seafaring cultures, civilizations that explored the oceans long before the Greeks. Could these charts have contained knowledge of lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, secrets of geography that would not be rediscovered for over 1,000 years? The existence of these hidden caches suggests a chilling possibility. The famous fire was a catastrophe, but it may have only destroyed the library's public face. The true, total loss of knowledge, the extinction of humanity's oldest and most profound secrets, could be buried even deeper, lost to time in chambers we have never found. Within these halls, the written word was only the beginning. The true magic of Alexandria happened in the conversations between the scholars who lived and worked there. This was a think tank in the most literal sense, a sanctuary where the greatest minds of the age were given a royal salary to do nothing but think, debate, and push the boundaries of knowledge. They were not just curators of information, they were its active creators. It was in this collaborative environment that a man named Eratosthenes, using little more than a stick and his knowledge of geometry, calculated the circumference of our planet. His result was not a rough guess. It was a measurement so precise it would not be surpassed for over 1,000 years. At the same time, another scholar named Aristarchus looked at the heavens and proposed a radical idea. He suggested that the Earth and all the other planets revolved around the Sun, a heliocentric model that was so far ahead of its time it was dismissed for centuries. Meanwhile, in a different wing, a physician named Herophilus was performing something then considered unthinkable, the dissection of human cadavers. His work laid the very foundations of human anatomy, mapping the nervous system and identifying the brain as the center of intelligence. The library's power came from forcing these diverse disciplines to collide. An astronomer could walk down the hall and consult the latest maps from a geographer. A physician could study a botanist's notes on medicinal plants. This cross-pollination of ideas, this constant intellectual friction, was the true engine of discovery. The destruction of the library was not just the burning of scrolls, it was the violent scattering of this critical mass of intellect. The collaborative ecosystem that allowed for such leaps of thought was shattered, and entire fields of science would spend the next 1,500 years simply trying to recover what was lost in that single catastrophic fire. The first crack in the library's seemingly unbreakable walls came not from a natural disaster, but from the ambitions of a single man. In the year 48 before the Common Era, Julius Caesar found himself trapped in a vicious civil war, cornered within the great harbor of Alexandria itself. Facing a powerful enemy fleet, Caesar made a desperate tactical decision. He ordered his own ships to be set ablaze, a wall of fire on the water meant to deny those vessels to his adversaries. But fire is a notoriously difficult servant to command. The flames, whipped by the sea winds, leaped from the wooden hulls and raced onto the docks. They engulfed the waterfront warehouses, and it is within those warehouses that history tells us a vast number of the library's scrolls were stored. In a single, chaotic night, centuries of accumulated thought were turned to smoke and ash, all as collateral damage in a political squabble. The true scale of this loss remains one of history's great debates. Some scholars argue it was a catastrophic event, that a significant portion of the great collection was housed right there on the docks, perhaps for export or copying. Others contend it was a more limited tragedy, that the burned scrolls were mostly duplicates destined for the Roman market, but the symbolism of the moment is undeniable. For the first time, the world witnessed how fragile its greatest repository of knowledge truly was. It was not brought low by a decline in scholarship or a loss of purpose. It was caught in the crossfire, a silent victim of a conflict it had no part in. This event shattered the illusion of the library's permanence, proving that human conflict is perhaps the most potent and unpredictable enemy that knowledge can ever face. Centuries after Caesar's fire, the library faced a threat far more systematic than a military accident. The Roman Empire was undergoing a profound transformation, its official religion shifting from a pantheon of old gods to the state-sanctioned power of Christianity. In the year 391, Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree that would reverberate through history, ordering the destruction of all pagan temples across the empire. The great Serapeum of Alexandria, the temple complex that housed the library's public collection, was not just a building of stone, it was a powerful symbol of the old world. To the newly empowered Christian authorities, it represented a competing ideology, a fortress of knowledge that did not conform to their own. And so, a fervent mob, likely encouraged by the local patriarch, descended upon the complex. They did not come to conquer territory, but to conquer thought itself. The magnificent statues of the gods were torn from their pedestals and smashed. The altars were defiled, and the scrolls housed within the daughter library, the accessible texts for scholars and citizens, were likely burned or scattered to the winds. This was not collateral damage from a war. This was a deliberate purge, an act of cultural annihilation driven by the conviction that some ideas are too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The loss here was calculated. Works of philosophy that challenged the new orthodoxy, pagan poetry that celebrated different gods, scientific texts that offered explanations outside of scripture, all were now deemed heretical. This event marked a terrifying shift in the relationship between power and knowledge. The ambition was no longer to collect all human thought, but to curate it, to decide which parts of the past were worthy of remembrance and which deserved to be erased forever. The intellectual landscape of the ancient world was not just changing, it was being actively, violently rewritten, and the Hidden Archives of Alexandria were among its most significant casualties. The final, symbolic death of the great library is wrapped in a story of fire and faith. Centuries after the Christian purges, a new power arrived at the gates of Alexandria. In the year 642, the Arab general Amr ibn al-As captured the city for the rising Islamic caliphate. The historical record from this moment is frustratingly thin, but a single, chilling narrative emerged long after the fact. According to this later account, the general wrote to the Caliph Omar, asking what should be done with the vast collection of books still remaining in the city. The Caliph's alleged reply has echoed through history as a verdict of annihilation. He reportedly said that if the books contained what was already in the Quran, they were superfluous and should be burned. If they contained anything that contradicted the Quran, they were dangerous and should be burned. The scrolls, he commanded, were to be distributed as fuel to heat the city's public bathhouses. The story goes that for 6 long months, the priceless manuscripts of antiquity fed the furnaces, providing warm baths for the citizens as centuries of human knowledge turned to ash. Most modern historians treat this account with deep skepticism. It was written centuries after the fact by a Christian bishop, likely as a piece of political propaganda to paint the new Muslim rulers as barbaric. The truth is, by the time of the Arab conquest, the library had likely been in a state of severe decline for generations. The great funding from the Ptolemies was a distant memory. The repeated fires and purges had taken their toll. The community of scholars had long since scattered. What remained was probably a hollow shell, a collection of rotting scrolls in a damaged building, their contents already forgotten by a world that had moved on. So why does this particular story hold such power? Because it serves as a perfect, terrible metaphor for the library's ultimate fate. It does not matter if every last scroll was physically burned in those bathhouse fires. The intellectual world that created and sustained the library was already gone. The will to preserve that specific collection of human thought, in all its messy and contradictory glory, had been extinguished. This narrative marks the point where the library ceased to be a physical place and passed completely into the realm of legend, a ghost whose final whisper was the crackle of dying parchment. The silence left by those lost scrolls created a hole in human understanding so vast it took centuries to climb out. For astronomy, the loss was a catastrophe. The work of Aristarchus, who correctly placed the sun at the center of our system, was almost entirely erased. Without his scrolls to build upon, later thinkers like Copernicus were forced to start from scratch, laboring for decades to prove an idea that had already been perfectly reasoned 2,000 years earlier. Then there was the star catalogue of Hipparchus, the most detailed map of the night sky ever compiled in the ancient world. He recorded the precise positions and brightness of hundreds upon hundreds of stars. That foundational work, the bedrock for all celestial navigation and astronomy, simply vanished. It is as if the entire memory of the cosmos was wiped clean, forcing humanity to relearn the patterns of the heavens one star at a time. In the field of mathematics, the void is just as profound. We know the names of brilliant thinkers, men like Apollonius and Diophantus, but their most advanced treatises are gone forever. Their scrolls may have contained solutions to problems in geometry and number theory that would baffle mathematicians for over a millennium. Think of the time and genius wasted. An elegant proof discovered in Alexandria and then lost to the flames might have saved generations of scholars from pursuing dead ends. Instead of advancing, entire fields of science were forced into a long and painful recovery, a scientific dark age where foundational insights had to be painfully rediscovered. The delay this caused in our collective understanding is staggering. How many more secrets of the universe would we know today if that chain of knowledge had remained unbroken? The cost of that single library's destruction is a debt we are still paying, a ghost of progress that haunts our every modern discovery. Perhaps the most personal cost of that great silence was felt in the art of healing. Inside the library were the complete works of physicians like Herophilus and Aristarchus, men who dared to look inside the human body to see how it truly worked. Their detailed anatomical drawings based on actual human dissection mapped the intricate pathways of the nervous system, and identified the brain as the command center for thought and motion. They even came close to understanding the circulatory system, realizing the heart acted as a pump. All of this meticulous knowledge, this accurate map of ourselves, was consumed by the flames. For the next 1500 years, doctors across Europe would operate with a fundamental misunderstanding of human anatomy, often relying on the flawed work of later Roman physicians who had only dissected animals. The consequences of this medical blackout were catastrophic and direct. Imagine a surgeon attempting a delicate operation, guided not by a true chart of the body's inner landscape, but by a distorted map filled with guesswork. The loss went even deeper than anatomy. Entire encyclopedias of pharmacy vanished. The library held vast compilations of herbal remedies from Egypt, surgical techniques from Mesopotamia, and complex medical theories from generations of Greek thinkers. This was not primitive folk medicine. These were sophisticated, tested treatments for everything from infections to fevers to complex wounds, knowledge gathered from centuries of observation and practice. When that wisdom disappeared, medicine was plunged into a dark age. It regressed from a science based on evidence and observation to a practice dominated by superstition and rigid dogma. For over a millennium, human health and longevity paid the price. The ghost of that lost medical library haunted every hospital and sickroom, a silent reminder of a path to understanding that was severed before it could truly blossom. This silence echoes loudest in the lost voices of the stage. We revere Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides as the pillars of Greek tragedy, but their fame is a monument built on fragments. These three men alone are believed to have written over 300 plays. We possess only 32. The great library of Alexandria held them all, the complete collected works of these masters and dozens of their contemporaries, playwrights whose names we have forgotten entirely. This was not merely a shelf of scripts, it was the living record of an entire culture's emotional and intellectual life. Think of the countless comedies that mocked the powerful, the lyrical poems that captured a moment's fleeting beauty, the epic cycles that rivaled Homer. They are all gone. This represents a catastrophic erosion of our understanding. We have lost the vast laboratory where narrative art was perfected, where character and plot were forged into the forms that still shape our stories today. How did a character's journey evolve from one play to the next? What political arguments were staged in the comedies that dared to satirize the state? We can only guess at the depth of human emotion explored in those missing works. The handful of surviving plays are magnificent, but they are like a few surviving pieces of a shattered mosaic. We can admire the individual tiles, but the grand picture, the full story of the ancient creative spirit, is a void we can never fill. The library's silence extends far beyond lost plays and forgotten stars. It also swallowed the blueprints for our own world. Within its archives lay the complete works of geniuses like Ctesibius and Hero of Alexandria, men who were not just philosophers but practical engineers. Hero described a device called an eolipile, a spinning sphere powered by steam. It was the world's first recorded steam engine, a primitive but functional turbine. He designed automatic door openers for temples, coin-operated machines that dispensed holy water, and intricate mechanical puppets that performed entire plays. These were not mere toys. They were demonstrations of foundational mechanical principles, of pneumatics and gearing that would not be commonly understood again for 1500 years. The library held their detailed treatises, the step-by-step instructions for building these marvels, and then those instructions were gone. The loss included more than spectacular gadgets. It was the systematic knowledge of advanced hydraulics that kept the great pharaoh's lighthouse functioning, the architectural secrets that allowed for such colossal structures, and the mathematical theories behind complex gear systems. All of it, the entire engineering curriculum of the ancient world, was effectively erased. This created a technological black hole. When James Watt tinkered with his steam engine in the 18th century, he was reinventing a wheel that Hero had already perfected. He had to solve problems of pressure and efficiency from scratch, problems for which solutions had already been written down, filed away, and then burned. The Industrial Revolution did not begin when humanity was ready for it. It began when we finally managed to recover a fraction of the knowledge that had been commonplace in Alexandria. The delay was not for a lack of genius in the intervening centuries, but for a lack of the instruction manuals that could have guided that genius. How different would our timeline look if those blueprints had survived? We might have skipped the Dark Ages entirely, leaping from the ancient world directly into a future we can now only imagine. This was more than the loss of plays and inventions. It was the erasure of memory itself. The library safeguarded the foundational histories of entire civilizations, written by the people who built them. Men like Berossus, a Babylonian priest, composed a complete history of his homeland, drawing from temple records that stretched back for millennia. His Egyptian counterpart, Manetho, created the definitive chronicle of the pharaohs, listing every dynasty in order with their great deeds. These were not dry lists of kings, they were the continuous narratives of cultures that flourished long before classical Greece, told from the inside. Today, we know these monumental works only through tiny, scattered fragments, brief quotes preserved by later Greek and Roman historians who were lucky enough to have held the original scrolls in their hands. The complete texts are gone. This loss has created a profound chasm in our understanding of the ancient world. Our knowledge of the sprawling Bronze Age empires, the intricate workings of the Persian court, and the rise of early Mediterranean cultures is permanently fragmentary. We are forced to piece together their stories from silent archaeology, from broken pottery and the foundations of palaces, and from the often biased summaries written by their rivals. It is like trying to reconstruct a grand epic novel using only a handful of random pages and the notes of a critic who disliked the book. We lost the voices of these civilizations speaking for themselves. We are left with a historical puzzle where half the pieces are simply missing, a ghostly outline of a past we can never fully know. The philosophical landscape we inherited is a map with vast, unexplored territories missing. While the works of Plato and Aristotle were copied and recopied, surviving through the Middle Ages, the great library held the complete intellectual inheritance of the ancient world. This included the original, unedited scrolls of the pre-Socratic thinkers, men like Democritus. Over 2,000 years before modern science confirmed it, Democritus proposed that everything in the universe was made of tiny, indivisible particles he called atoms, moving through a void. His was a universe of matter and physical laws, not capricious gods, but we know his revolutionary theory only through second-hand summaries and critiques written by his philosophical opponents. His own powerful arguments, his elegant proofs, his complete vision of an atomic universe, all of it was stored in Alexandria and then erased. We are left with the ghost of his idea, stripped of its original force and detail. The loss goes far deeper than a single theory. Entire schools of thought, like the skeptics and the cynics, had their foundational texts preserved there. The skeptics taught that certainty was an illusion and that the path to peace was to suspend judgment. The cynics rejected all social conventions and political power, arguing for a life lived in stark accordance with nature. Later philosophers received these ideas only in diluted, often distorted forms. filtered through the lens of writers who disagreed with them. Imagine reading a summary of a political manifesto written by its fiercest critic. You would get the basic outline, but you would miss the passion, the nuance, the compelling rhetoric that made it persuasive in the first place. This is what happened to Western philosophy. The destruction of the library did not just burn scrolls, it collapsed the entire ecosystem of ancient thought. It dramatically narrowed the philosophical diversity available to the medieval and Renaissance thinkers who shaped our modern world. They were given a curated, limited set of options, a philosophical toolkit that was missing some of its most innovative and challenging instruments. What if the complete works of the skeptics had survived to challenge the foundations of religious dogma? How might the raw, uncompromising arguments of the cynics have influenced our concepts of freedom and society? The fire did not just destroy old books. It may have closed off entire avenues of human inquiry, steering the course of Western civilization down a single, well-lit corridor, while the doors to other, potentially more revolutionary ways of thinking were sealed shut forever. This vast collection was also the ancient world's greatest language lab. Within its archives, scholars did not just store texts, they actively worked to understand them, compiling the first known grammars, dictionaries, and translation guides for languages from across the known world. The library was a living hub of philology, the science of language itself. It likely held the definitive keys to understanding scripts that remain mysteries to us today. Consider the Minoan script known as Linear A, etched onto clay tablets from a civilization that thrived over 3,000 years ago. We can see the symbols, but we cannot read the words. The library almost certainly held bilingual glossaries or scholarly commentaries that could have unlocked its meaning, allowing us to finally hear the voices of this lost island culture. The same is true for the Etruscans, the sophisticated people who dominated Italy before the Romans. We have thousands of Etruscan inscriptions, but we understand only a tiny fraction of their vocabulary and grammar. Their entire worldview, their literature, their history, remains trapped behind a linguistic wall that the scholars of Alexandria were uniquely equipped to tear down. The Rosetta Stone, with its parallel text in Greek and Egyptian, was a miraculous fluke of survival. It gave us the key to hieroglyphs. Now imagine if the library had preserved a similar multilingual corpus, not just for one language, but for dozens of the ancient world's lost tongues. It would have been a master key, a universal translator for the entirety of human civilization. Instead, that master key was melted down in the fires. With the burning of the library's linguistic archives, we did not just lose words on a page. We burned the bridges that could have connected us to countless cultures, leaving their stories forever silent, and their inscriptions as nothing more than elegant, unreadable marks on stone. This global ambition meant the library's walls reached far beyond the Mediterranean. Its royal agents were instructed to gather knowledge from the entire known world, venturing into the courts of India and the academies of Persia. Imagine the texts that arrived after such long journeys. They would have included revolutionary Indian mathematical manuscripts, detailing a nascent decimal system and the concept of zero, ideas that would not reach Europe for over 1,000 years. There were likely complete Zoroastrian scriptures from Persia, outlining a complex cosmology and ethical system that rivaled anything in Greece. And there could have been merchant logs describing the monsoon trade routes to India, or even accounts of the great African kingdoms south of the Sahara, lands of gold and powerful empires that were little more than myth to most Greeks and Romans. This was not a collection of exotic curiosities. It was a systematic effort to build a planetary knowledge base, a unified understanding of humanity. The destruction of this global archive had a catastrophic, narrowing effect. It severed the intellectual bridge between East and West at its most critical point. Without these texts, the Western world retrenched into a Hellenocentric bubble, convinced that all significant knowledge originated with the Greeks. The profound scientific and philosophical achievements of India, Persia, and other cultures were effectively erased from the Western consciousness. This loss delayed the cross-pollination of ideas for centuries. What if Indian mathematics had been available to the scholars of Alexandria? Could their combined genius have propelled humanity into an age of calculus and physics a millennium earlier? The library was our first and best chance to create a truly global conversation, a shared project for all of humanity. Its burning did not just destroy Greek plays. It silenced the voices of an entire world, leaving the West to rediscover, piece by painful piece, the wisdom it had once held all in one place. Without that central archive to anchor it, the intellectual world of the West simply came undone. The Great Library had been the stable core, the fixed point around which all knowledge revolved. When it was gone, and when the Western Roman Empire itself began to crumble, the entire system lost its center of gravity. Europe fractured into 1,000 isolated territories, each one focused on its own immediate survival. The complex network of roads and shipping lanes that once carried scrolls and scholars from one end of the Mediterranean to the other fell into disrepair and disuse. The common language of learning, Greek, slowly faded from memory in the West. The sophisticated knowledge of engineering, medicine, and astronomy, once the shared inheritance of the classical world, became fragmented, then obscure, and then simply vanished from common understanding. It was not a single event, but a slow, grinding process of forgetting. The Great Library's destruction was the first, crucial domino to fall, and its collapse made the darkness that followed almost inevitable. What was lost was not just the information itself, but the very mechanism for its preservation and transmission. There was no central institution left with the resources, the mandate, or the sheer ambition to copy and distribute the great works to keep the flame of inquiry alive. Without that engine, the light of classical learning began to flicker and die out across Europe. This knowledge did not disappear from the earth entirely, of course. It found a new home, a new guardian, in a most unexpected place. While Europe descended into its long twilight, the Islamic world was entering a brilliant golden age. In great centers of learning like Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars actively sought out the surviving texts of the Greeks. They translated the works of Plato and Aristotle, of Euclid and Ptolemy, into Arabic, preserving them, debating them, and most importantly, building upon them. The advanced medical techniques of Galen, the astronomical models of Ptolemy, the complex mathematics of the Greeks, all were saved from the void not in a European monastery, but in an Islamic library. The survival of this knowledge in the East created a profound and lasting intellectual debt. For centuries, the only thing standing between the Western world and total amnesia was the scholarship of a culture it often viewed as a rival. The Great Library of Alexandria had been designed as a universal backup for human thought. Its destruction meant that backup failed, and the only remaining copy was now stored in a different operating system, in a language the West could no longer read. The resulting stagnation in Europe was not a period of empty silence, but a time of profound isolation. A local lord might boast a small collection of a dozen precious books, while just a few centuries earlier, a single institution had housed hundreds of thousands. The collective memory of a continent had been reduced to a handful of whispers. This was the true ripple effect of the fire in Alexandria. It broke the chain of progress, forcing an entire civilization to start over, to slowly and painfully reassemble its own past from the scattered fragments that had been left behind. The torch of learning, so brutally extinguished in the West, was carried forward in a new and brilliant light. As Europe fragmented, a vast intellectual project was taking shape thousands of miles to the east. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, centered in the magnificent city of Baghdad, a new kind of library was born. The House of Wisdom was not a silent tomb for scrolls, but a vibrant, state-funded academy dedicated to one overwhelming mission: translation. Caliph sponsored teams of multilingual scholars, paying them in gold, to systematically seek out the surviving scientific and philosophical manuscripts of the Greeks. They tracked down these precious texts wherever they had drifted, often in the monasteries and libraries of the Byzantine Empire. Through this monumental effort, the foundational works of Aristotle, the medical genius of Galen, and the astronomical models of Ptolemy were not just saved, they were given a new life in the Arabic language. This was a partial salvation, a desperate rescue operation launched centuries after the original disaster. The House of Wisdom became the new memory bank for classical knowledge, but its shelves were stocked only with what had already escaped the repeated fires of Alexandria. They could only preserve the books that had been copied and dispersed in time. The complete archive, the full spectrum of human thought collected by the Ptolemies, was a ghost they could never summon. This meant the selection of works that survived was not a deliberate choice, but a historical accident. Think of it as a salvage crew arriving after a great ship has sunk. They can only save the cargo that has already floated to the surface. The heavy chests, the ones holding the most revolutionary or obscure ideas, remain on the seabed, lost forever. So when this carefully curated collection of Greek knowledge eventually made its way back into medieval Europe, it was not the full, chaotic, and challenging library of antiquity. It was a filtered version, a greatest hits album missing all the experimental B-sides and the radical deep cuts that could have challenged the very foundations of medieval thought. The world was given a second chance, but it was a chance with profound and lasting limitations. That single dramatic fire is a powerful story, but it is not the whole truth. The complete disappearance of the Great Library was not a sudden, cinematic event. It was a slow, grinding decay that unfolded over hundreds of years, a death by 1,000 cuts. The first major blow was indeed Caesar's fire in 48 before the Common Era, but that was a beginning, not an end. Later, during a Roman imperial war, another large section of the city, and likely more of its stored knowledge, was burned by the Emperor Aurelian. Then came the Christian purges of the Serapeum, a targeted demolition of its public wing. And finally, if the later stories hold any kernel of truth, the Arab conquest may have disposed of whatever rotting remnants were left. These were not isolated tragedies, they were symptoms of a deeper, more insidious problem. The library did not just face external attacks, it suffered from internal neglect. The royal funding from the Ptolemies, that blank check for knowledge, dried up long before the final building fell. Successive rulers saw it as a financial burden, not a national treasure. Without the money to pay scribes, the endless work of copying and repairing the fragile papyrus scrolls simply stopped. Imagine a vast forest where no new trees are planted. Slowly, the oldest ones begin to fall and the canopy thins. The library's collection faced a similar fate. Scrolls stored in damp conditions were consumed by mold. Papyrus, a fragile plant material, simply crumbled into dust over the centuries. The knowledge they held was not burned away in an instant. It faded, page by page, into a silent, permanent oblivion. This slow demise is a far more chilling lesson for us today. It teaches us that the greatest threat to knowledge is rarely a single, villainous act. It is the slow, quiet process of forgetting, the decision by a society that preserving the past is no longer a priority. It is the budget cut that closes an archive, the political shift that rewrites a curriculum, the simple, passive act of letting things fall apart. The ghost of Alexandria warns us that civilization is not a fortress, but a fragile garden. It requires constant, active tending, or it will inevitably be reclaimed by the wilderness. Our own age of information faces a silent, creeping threat that echoes the slow decay of those papyrus scrolls. We have built a new library of Alexandria, but it is made of ones and zeros stored on servers that hum in climate-controlled rooms. This digital universe feels permanent, yet it is profoundly fragile. A single corrupted hard drive can erase a lifetime of family photos. A company going out of business can shutter an entire online library. File formats we use today, from documents to videos, can become unreadable in just a few decades as the software needed to open them vanishes into obsolescence. Think of the early websites, the digital art, the first social media platforms that defined a generation. Vast portions of this cultural record have already disappeared into a digital void, a silent crash with no smoke or fire. The lesson of Alexandria is not just about fire, but about the illusion of permanence. We are amassing more knowledge than any civilization in history, yet we are storing it on media with a potentially shorter lifespan than papyrus. We face our own form of systemic decay, not from mold, but from planned obsolescence and corporate failure. Are we, as a global society, actively building multiple, redundant, and future-proof archives for our collective digital heritage? Or are we simply trusting that someone else is taking care of it, repeating the ancient mistake of assuming our repository is too big to fail? The ghost of Alexandria challenges us to look at our own digital world and ask what we are truly doing to ensure that the story of our time does not one day become another collection of unreadable files on a forgotten server. This persistent hope for discovery keeps the legend of the library alive in the minds of modern archaeologists. The tantalizing whispers of hidden underground archives have fueled a quiet, determined quest for generations. Concealed chambers or forgotten storerooms, their entrances bricked up for centuries, still exist beneath the bustling streets of modern Alexandria. The city's dry climate and stable subterranean conditions offer a fragile promise, a chance that papyrus scrolls could have survived where they would have crumbled anywhere else. Expeditions have probed the silt of the ancient harbor and mapped the foundations of ruined temples. Yet the chaotic urban landscape built directly atop the old city makes large-scale, systematic excavation a near impossibility. It is a search for a single, silent room in a vast, living metropolis. The potential reward, however, is almost beyond measure. The discovery of even one new scroll, a single intact text from the library's fabled collection, would be a world-shaking event. Imagine unrolling a manuscript and finding a lost play by Sophocles, its dialogue speaking to us across the millennia. Or perhaps it would be the complete star catalogue of Hipparchus, finally giving us the ancient sky as they truly saw it. Such a find would not just be a new historical artifact, it would be a key capable of unlocking doors we thought were sealed forever and rewriting chapters of history we believed were complete. This enduring possibility, this faint but persistent signal from the past, reminds us that the final chapter on the Great Library has not yet been written. Its greatest treasures may not have been turned to ash but merely lost, waiting in the darkness for the right moment to be found. We are living in the shadow of a stolen future. The unbroken chain of inquiry that began in Alexandria was shattered, and we can only guess at the world that chain might have built. With its archives intact, the slow, stumbling rediscovery of the Renaissance might have been entirely unnecessary. The scientific revolution, which began with Copernicus in the 16th century, could have unfolded in the workshops of the Roman Empire. Picture a world where the steam engines of Hero of Alexandria were not treated as novelties, but were scaled up and refined over 1,000 years of continuous development. The mechanical age might have dawned while the Colosseum still hosted games. The foundational principles of calculus, laboriously pieced together by Newton and Leibniz, could have been a standard university text, a direct inheritance from the mathematicians whose work was lost in the flames. This is not mere fantasy. It is the logical extension of the progress we know was already happening within the library's walls. That lost millennium of potential advancement represents the single greatest debt in human history. The cost was not just what we forgot, but the future we were denied. What medical breakthroughs were delayed by the loss of those anatomical texts? Diseases like the bubonic plague, which wiped out a third of Europe, might have been understood and contained with the advanced medical knowledge preserved in Alexandria. The very concept of public health, of germ theory, could have been established Chinese letter centuries earlier, saving countless millions of lives. The library's destruction did not just set back the calendar. It narrowed the very horizons of human possibility, leaving us to wander in a technological desert when we could have been building starships. This counterfactual world forces us to confront a sobering reality. Progress is not inevitable. It is a fragile flame passed from one generation to the next, and it can be extinguished not only by fire but by neglect. The ghost of Alexandria is not just a memory of what was lost. It is the haunting echo of all that could have been. Beyond the lost scrolls and forgotten blueprints lies a deeper wound, one carved into our collective psyche. The Library of Alexandria is no longer just a place in history. It is an idea, a symbol of a dream we have never fully abandoned. It represents that pure, almost arrogant human drive to know everything, to gather the entire universe of thought into a single, luminous point. Its burning, then, was more than an architectural loss. It was the shattering of that dream, a stark lesson in the brittleness of our own legacy. We see ourselves in that library, in its ambition to touch the sun of total understanding. And in its ashes, we confront our own shadow, the terrifying possibility that everything we build, everything we learn, can be so easily returned to silence. This is the story of Icarus, written not for a single boy, but for an entire civilization. It is a permanent cautionary tale, whispering that the heights of our achievement are matched only by the depths of our vulnerability. The ghost of Alexandria haunts us not because of the specific plays or star charts we lost, but because it holds up a mirror to our own precarious moment. Every time we back up a hard drive or worry about a digital format becoming obsolete, we are feeling the echo of that ancient fire. We are reliving the same fundamental anxiety, the fear that the thread connecting us to our past and to our future is terrifyingly thin. This is why we keep searching for its lost halls and telling its story. The library endures as a monument to our potential, and its ruins stand as a grave for our innocence, a permanent reminder that the greatest threat to knowledge is not a single flame, but the slow, chilling wind of indifference. That ancient ambition to safeguard our collective memory has never truly died. It has simply found new homes, new forms in our modern world. Institutions like the Library of Congress and the British Library are the direct spiritual heirs of Alexandria's grand vision. They too send out their agents not with royal decrees but with legal deposit laws, gathering a copy of every book, map, and recording published within their nations. Their vaults now hold millions of volumes, a physical archive of our culture that would have stunned the Ptolemies. Yet the most revolutionary revival of the Alexandrian dream is not built of stone and paper, but of silicon and light. Projects like the Internet Archive and Wikipedia represent a fundamental shift in our strategy. They are not centralized temples of knowledge, but vast, distributed networks. The Internet Archive actively crawls the web, taking snapshots of entire websites to preserve digital moments that would otherwise vanish into the ether. It is a global effort to prevent a new kind of dark age, a digital amnesia where entire layers of our culture simply disappear as links break and companies fold. Wikipedia, written and edited by volunteers across the globe, is the closest we have ever come to a living, breathing, and instantly accessible encyclopedia of everything. It is the museum's collaborative spirit reborn on a planetary scale. Our methods have evolved from confiscating scrolls in a harbor to crawling petabytes of data across a global network, but the core mission is astonishingly unchanged. We are still trying to gather the sum of human knowledge. The crucial difference now is resilience. We are no longer storing our greatest treasures in a single, fragile library. We are building a system with countless copies scattered across countless servers, a global brain with no single point of failure. This is our conscious, collective answer to the ghost of Alexandria. It is our promise that a single fire, whether literal or digital, will never again have the power to erase centuries of human thought. The Great Vanishing must remain a tragedy of the past, not a warning for our future.